Thousands of students in private accommodation across the country are facing eviction this weekend following NSFAS's failure to pay millions of debt owed to the Private Student Housing Association and other independent student accommodation landlords. So last week, the association confirmed that NSFAS owe them 44 million rand and the amount could be higher. The association has given NSFAS 14 days to pay the debt or students will be evicted. SABC News reporter Patricia Visagie is in Hatfield and joins us live now. That's in Pretoria. Patricia, a very good morning to you. Thanks indeed for your time. Great to see you. This seems to be an ongoing problem. NSFAS students that we've spoken to in our special coverage this week talking about, NSFAS debt that has not been paid. Now we're looking at accommodation that has not been paid. This is certainly a crisis. What is the extent of what could ultimately be thousands, I guess, of students being evicted?
Well, good morning, Griselda, and of course to our viewers. Definitely an annual crisis that thousands of students face every year this time, and many have been asking why is NSFAS not coming up with a workable solution, a much smoother administrative structure that could obviously ease the pressure and perhaps help students not to face the anxiety that they have to face every time when they're actually supposed to focus on moving on and really starting their academic year. And some of them, we know that they first years. Some come from far-flung areas, rural areas, and this is their first time arriving in the big cities, hoping to obviously, start the journey into their futures and so forth. And then they find themselves facing these challenges that relate to the delays in funding from NSFAS. And now accommodation, which you would understand is a very sensitive issue. And we've heard the stories that links to this challenge, a testimony, some of it very disturbing in terms of what happens when students are evicted, what are the challenges that they face. But I want to bring in a student who is an NSFAS beneficiary, and this is Kamogelo Tefu. Kamogelo, you're one of the students that depend on NSFAS to obviously secure your academic journey. Tell us about your experience. What have you gone through? What do you hear from fellow students? What are the challenges that they face? How does that affect them mentally, their academics and so forth?
Okay. First of all, NSFAS is it's not a secure funding that you can rely on, because there's been cases with me. Last year, there was a point where I didn't get any allowance for 2 months. So I always have to be in between jobs to try to cater for myself. And also this year, the system that's been introduced of the accommodations where students apply on the portal is not working out. Because now I'm working for an accommodation and it's causing traffic. Their system and ours are not linking. So students think they've secured spots where they can actually stay, but it's not the case. They have to apply with us and the NSFAS portal keeps accepting people. It's as if they don't consult with the flats, and now we have to bear the setbacks and the complaints from parents. Other than that, it's a government bursary, but it gives us the least amount of allowance. And this year, the accommodation allowance has also been decreased to 4,500, which also doesn't make sense because in metro areas, the rent here starts from 5,000. So this implies that every student has to top up. And then what about us who solely depend on NSFAS? So it's quite heartbreaking and sometimes it makes us emotional, but then, yeah, it's hard.
All right, thank you so much. I want to bring in Kagisho Mamabolo. He is the CEO of the Private Student Housing Association. And it is your job now to facilitate this fallout that might affect thousands of students who are facing eviction if that 44 million rand is not paid. Tell us about, since the last time we interviewed you, when you were saying 14 days, what has happened? What negotiations has taken place between the association and NSFAS, and perhaps the Department of Higher Education?
Thank you very much. Well, in as far as 44 million is concerned, we are still in the dark. We had a PSHA members meeting on Thursday where we tried to get a sense from the members if there has been any contact from NSFAS, if there has been any payment that's coming through. Unfortunately, and this is very sad, unfortunately, only one member has received a communication from NSFAS. And also, it was the same communication that comes in now and then, which is we are verifying, we want to make sure that the students are correct, and we will pay as soon as possible. So we are still staying at the outstanding amount as we explained before. We are now today going through our members' residences because this weekend members are taking in students. We just want to make sure that everything goes smoothly. Like where we are at the field in Hatfield, this property has more than 1,000 beds and it's accredited by NSFAS. So 80% of the students here are NSFAS. Those are the ones that you see queuing behind me, but there's a bit of a challenge. The students, they find that they exist on the portal, but when they come to the residences, they do not exist. So those are some of the technical issues that the NSFAS system brings. And of course, we've got 40% of the students that are non-NSFAS. And those students are now coming in easily and smoothly because they pay for themselves.
Do you still keep to your word that should you not get this money, you'll be evicting these students?
It is quite sad. Some of the members informed us on Thursday that already there have been students, especially around TUT area, that have showed up and they still appear on the list of unfunded students. Of course, members have a right to continue to evict those students. We will visit the facilities on Monday to monitor the progress. We have since then wrote to the Minister of Higher Education and Training because she is the accounting authority. And also we did this because some of the interviews we did last week with the NSFAS administrator, the SABC, he alluded to us that we are barking at the wrong tree. We should actually focus some of this request to the department. So we hope that in the coming weeks we'll receive a positive response to the Minister and we'll be able to engage with her.
Apart from the money that is owed, there's another challenge that you are facing, that you are unhappy with, and that is the rate that obviously determines how your financing is structured and what are the criteria that you have to honor. Maybe just break that down for our viewers so we understand exactly how the rate, what is the rate, how is it determined, and how it affects your business.
Thank you very much. So the NSFAS rate ranges from 4,500 if you are at the bottom, and if you are on top, if your building is graded building A, it's up to 5,000 rents cap. This rate does not take into consideration that the accommodation providers have to provide transport, have to provide unlimited electricity, have to provide unlimited Wi-Fi, have to provide laundry services, have to provide cleaning services, and have to provide health and welfare services on the facilities. And this is according to the requirements of NSFAS. In addition to that, we are not supposed to charge damages. If the students vacate and they damage the area, we are not supposed to ask for deposit from students if they are moving in at the beginning of the year and they do not have NSFAS confirmation. So if you look at how we pay all these rates, and especially municipal rates and wages, is 40% of that rate. So it is not enough. So we are calling on the Department of Higher Education and Training with NSFAS. We don't want to be pushed to NSFAS and NSFAS pushed us to the department. Whoever is responsible for announcing the rate should do it now. We have received last week a new lease agreement, a NSFAS lease agreement for 2025. It is shocking. It is shocking. We are given a rate as accommodation providers by NSFAS to accept, so that these students that are behind me, they must sign that lease. That lease does not have a rate. So we are effectively signing or implementing a NSFAS lease that does not have a rate. So they can come tomorrow and say that lease, that rate remains as previously. And we will push back on that. The second issue with that lease is that it does not give us as accommodation providers an opportunity to deal with issues of damages, to deal with issues of eviction. You know, if you look at how it is constructed, it is not viable. It is only favoring NSFAS, and we were not consulted around that as accommodation providers. We are asked on that lease that we must not ask students to top up on the rate. And I'm afraid that if the NSFAS rate does not increase, if the NSFAS rate remains the same, it decreases, students are going to be the ones that are affected, because there might be no limited Wi-Fi, there may not be limited electricity, services of students are likely to be downgraded, and that will be definitely unfortunate.
You know, the last time we spoke, we had a conversation about how the efforts to bridge the gap between perhaps the haves and the have-nots is ultimately then compromised by issues such as that, the rates, the non-payment, the lease discrepancies. And you mentioned that one of the things that you guys are fighting for is to make sure that, in particular, the students who come from disadvantaged backgrounds are treated fairly with the dignity that they deserve.
Absolutely. If you would recall that previously we have emphasized the fact that there's a shortage of student accommodation across the country. Government is not going to be able to bridge the gap on its own. NSFAS, through management of the student accommodation process, is not going to build beds in the next 5 years. As private sector, we can do that working with government, but we must push back where we feel that there's no fairness and there's no fair treatment of all the students. Whether you are a NSFAS student or you are non-NSFAS students, students must be treated the same, must be given quality beds, must be given a safe environment where they can live in, and they must be given an affordable and fair rate. And we are saying, as the private accommodation providers, is that our interest is not the highest rate. In fact, we can argue that the NSFAS rate can even stay the way it is for the next 3 or 4 years. But NSFAS must communicate with us properly. That's number one. NSFAS must take up our initiative where we said, let's approach government and municipalities and say, can we try to keep municipal rates around student accommodation, around the educational category, as opposed to a commercial rate that we pay? So with that, it was going to help us absorb some of the costs that are exorbitant around school. Then all the students, whether you are a NSFAS or you are non-NSFAS, you will be able to enjoy the same services.
It's good that you're saying that, but how do you respond to the criticism that the private student accommodation landlords, for instance, your association, for instance, is exploiting the plight of desperate students for cheap profit?
Well, that's a rhetoric that is being pushed around to discredit the good work that we do. We have built more than 80,000 what we call purpose-built student accommodation.
But it is still a business. You are profit-driven here.
Of course, we are profit-driven. Everyone has to get profit. There are investments that go into, but we are part of the ecosystem. Even universities, their residences on campus are profit-driven. But we are saying, recognize us for the economic contribution that we make. So ultimately, we are going to say to our members, continue to build. As an association, we will continue to fight for a fair rate and a fair treatment, and we're going to bridge the gap.
Thousands of needy students that might be on the streets in the next couple of days. Are you not scared that you will be seen as the biggest devil here, that you actually plunging them into that state of chaos that might compromise their safety, their mental health, so much other issues that affect those students should they find themselves on the streets? Some of them come from far areas and they might be left desperate, and ultimately we're all going to point fingers at you. So how are you going to deal with that?
Okay, definitely, but just know that in the student accommodation sector, we've got non-PSHA members, or we've got accommodation providers that do not meet the minimum norms and standards of government as our members do. With that, we are going to ensure that as we respond to the challenges, we don't isolate, right? We are, as PSHA, engaging other accommodation providers to find out what plans do they have in place. Our board is actually coming up with a plan of saying, what happens in a situation where students are affected? It is not their fault, it is NSFAS' fault, and also we are seen to be responding to their needs. A temporary measure is something that our board is considering to say, during a difficult time, how are we going to assist those students? And we are doing this because as PSHA, we are just not interested in those that are paying us, in those that have secured. Even those that are coming here are not going to be having beds. We are going to intervene to ensure that students don't sleep on the streets.
Just lastly, your last appeal to make sure that when the institutions of higher learning open, perhaps from next week, the week after that, that this conundrum is ultimately resolved. There are still a couple of days to make sure that we find a solution that will benefit everyone. But your last appeal?
Our last appeal, we are requesting a dialogue on the table. We are just tired as PSHA of being gathered in a room of people talking the same thing over and over. We are now being channeled to the department. We are saying we are ready to engage with the department. We are ready to say to the department, these are the issues we have raised with NSFAS that have been ignored. And this is how we intend to contribute in the sector in the next coming years.
Right. Thank you so much, Kagisho Mamabulo. He's the CEO for the Private Student Housing Association. Griselda, here you've got students, perhaps most of them, first years, first time that they coming to an institution of higher learning. Many of them are here to register, just to get ready to gear up as they're about to start their tertiary life. I just want to see if maybe we can get a word or two from some of them just to find out how are they feeling. Obviously, this is now a risk that I'm taking just to get their voices on air. How are you guys feeling this morning?
I'm anxious.
Why are you anxious?
Because like everything is all over the place. We're trying to move in. We still haven't signed the lease, but we paid the lease fee. So it's like, yeah, we're just confused.
And are you getting the help that you need? What's the response that you're getting in terms of perhaps the confusions that exist?
We just got here. So we just got here.
You haven't really, it's not your second time trying or anything like that?
No.
What are you hoping for?
I don't know. I just want to sign my lease and move in.
All right, thank you. And you?
She's not moving in here.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Let's see if there's somebody else. Is there somebody else that is applying for accommodation? How are you feeling this morning? I understand that you're also applying for accommodation.
I'm okay. Can't complain, you know. I've already applied though, so.
Oh, so you got a space and everything. So what are you here to do today?
I'm here to sign my contract and move in.
Okay, did you have any challenges?
Not that I know of, no.
Thank you so much, Griselda. So most of the students that are queuing here seem to have everything in order, seem to get the help that they need inside. There's also long queues as many of the students are getting ready. At other accommodation, same queues where students are obviously here to sort out their lease agreements, their contracts. But, you know, there are also those that we've heard of who arrive at these accommodation facilities and they still have pending applications on the NSFAS portal. So they really just take, a risk, a leap of faith, and they come here hoping to try their level best, and some of them are then turned around, are rejected, and they come from far areas. They come from KZN, Eastern Cape, and we've heard the horror stories from some of the student bodies and from some of the students themselves as to what happens when some of those students land here and they are not getting the results that they are hoping for. Some of them are left destitute and they don't know where to go. They don't have enough money. Of course, other students try to help the student bodies. There are activists in the area that also try to intervene and see how they can help. Some of them, of course, get money to go back home. But these are ultimately the challenges that many students face when their applications keep on pending. And we've heard stories of how some of the students, they can go for months waiting for NSFAS funding, 3 months, 6 months. Earlier, one of the res managers has told us of situations where some of the students are housed for about 6 months with a pending application, and because the systems are not linking, then obviously the accommodation officers can't see whether that student is unfunded or funded, and they only find out 6 months later. And unfortunately, it's a loss for some of the landlords when they ultimately confirm that information and it's months later, and there's nothing they can do about it because they can't claim that money, and they are given the runaround. And it's on the backdrop of some of these realities that you now find the private student housing association taking the stance that if their money is not paid to their members, then ultimately they are ready to evict these students. So we'll have to see. Most of them perhaps will only know this coming week what exactly their status is, whether they will be finding accommodation, whether it is funded, or whether they will be sent packing. So it's a story that's unfolding, it's developing. We'll be monitoring it very closely to see exactly how does it unfold, and we'll be going to other institutions. From here we are heading to TUT to see what is happening there, what is the mood, the atmosphere like, and what are the issues that students are battling there with. We'll also try and bring in some of the student leaders to speak to them to find out exactly what's the word on the ground, because they normally run the ground to get the issues from the students and try to obviously negotiate on their behalf, lobby on their behalf. So that conversation, perhaps if we have time, we'll bring it to you as well with one of the student leaders at TUT to find out what's the latest development as we are heading into the opening of the institutions of higher learning, but also the accommodation standoff crisis that some students might be facing.
Patricia, just before I let you go, just taking a look at that line, it begs to ask the question about the vulnerabilities of, in particular, young girls there. Some of them are not from this province. They've travelled from afar. If issues relating to accommodation are not sorted out, what happens to these young people? Not everyone is being accompanied by their parent there. I'm not sure if we still have Patricia with us on. All right, Patricia is still there. We do apologize for our camera moving left and right there. But Patricia, I'm sure you can still hear me.
Yes, I can.
So Patricia was asking about the vulnerabilities. So just taking a look at that line, you could clearly see that there are some young girls, some unaccompanied by their families, possibly because they've traveled from very far looking for accommodation. The vulnerabilities that arise for both young girls and young boys in the big city, not able to find accommodation, being evicted from the accommodation. They can't necessarily go back home. Talk to us about some of those challenges.
Well, Criselda, that is perhaps one of the highlights. Last week you spoke to one of the leaders, student body leaders, and he alluded to this, that annually they find themselves having to intervene in some of those challenges that arise of young women who come from far areas, who do not know the big cities, and who do not have anyone around here, and often they come from impoverished backgrounds. Where there's not much money, there's not much help, there's not much guidance, and they come here, and when they find out that there is no help, and he was telling us that there is actually some sort of reprieve. So what they do is they give these students that come from far areas 24 hours to live free in the student accommodation, and in that 24 hours you have just a certain number of days to actually register and find out whether your registration was successful, and if you don't make it within that 24 hours, then you are evicted. Many of those students then, squat. they squat with other students. Some of them take risks and they live with strangers, and their vulnerability gets exploited. Some of these students even find themselves in very risky situations where they are sexually exploited, and some of them actually being subjected to sexual violence such as rape and cases like that. Ultimately a very sensitive demonstration of just how vulnerable and desperate some of these students get during that transition period where there's so much uncertainty and they do not know whether their applications have been approved. And then there's the other issue that also taps into this, that also contributes, and that's the digital divide. That some of these students come from areas where telecommunication infrastructure is not that good. So they ultimately don't have full access to the internet, the NSFAS portal, to navigate as they're supposed to. Hence they come to the big cities where they then take a risk because here they feel that they will have easier access to obviously complete their applications and so forth. So there are those issues that also contribute, and ultimately for those who do not know anyone in the big city, who do not have help, they take the risk, they gamble with their lives because they're that desperate. So these are some of the issues that students face who come here, in particular the young ones, the first year students who do not know much and don't have anyone to protect them, to cushion them, to shield them, and they find themselves on the streets. I mean, we've heard the horror stories of students who sleep in toilets, public toilets, students who sleep at train stations, students who sleep even outside here because they're just so desperate, they don't know where to go, and this all as they're waiting to see whether they will be getting funding. And then you have to also understand that with the high matric pass rate, that means that you have a higher influx of students who come in who are hoping that they would get a foot into a tertiary institution, and many people take that risk knowing that there's uncertainty, but you can't blame them, can you? It is students who are fighting for their future, and with all the social challenges that we have in South Africa, it just makes sense that you find yourself in situations like that. And that's exactly what Mr. Mamabolo was talking about, how the standoff between the state and associations of his ultimately compromises many students.
Patricia, thank you very much indeed for that insightful reporting. Certainly a very concerning issue, and I think as we head towards the reopening of these universities, we're going to see a whole lot of these young people jostling for accommodation and some being left in situations such as that. We certainly hope that it is resolved.